I know we've had a very full service already, and because I got all these people in the building, I still got to give y'all a sermon, but I'm going to try to keep it brief. Y'all, there are moments in history when a society reveals what it truly believes about power. I know that we are living in one of these moments now, a moment where there are wars continually going on. There is greater and greater policing. There are questions about whose body is sacred, questions about whose voice counts, who gets to shape the future of democracy. Those questions are not theoretical right now. They are being answered in courtrooms, in legislature. And as I specifically focus on Women's History Month, although, as I said, it's more women's futures, I can't help but to also name the seemingly daily humiliations that far too many women and gender-expansive people carry without anyone making headlines about it. Y'all, we have been living in a time where the most powerful man in this country has mocked women's bodies, has bragged about sexual assault. Y'all, he has called women nasty and crazy and dumb. This man has appointed other men credibly accused of sexual misconduct, and then he dismissed the women who spoke up as liars. Y'all, this is not a rumor. This is public record. And it has an impact. This is why I'm talking about it today, because when contempt for women's dignity is modeled from the highest office of the land, that contempt doesn't just stay at the top. It seeps downward into policies, into legislation, into institutions that take their cues from power. Here in Georgia and all around the world, we see it playing out in real time with attacks on reproductive freedom, attacks on transgender youth, attacks on access to voting, which is the very mechanism which oppressed voices have used to fight back. This attack on these mechanisms is not a coincidence. We know that they are a part of a larger coordinated effort to narrow the definition of who belongs, but we don't believe that. We know that history teaches us something, that whenever power tries to close the circle, that there is a spirit somewhere. We say that that is a spirit of love and of justice that rises up to widen the circle again. And I gotta say, more often than not, that widening begins with a woman that is willing to say something that the world is not ready to hear. Yes. Y'all know I love inviting us to remember our UU ancestors, and so I gotta share that. I know that y'all actually know about this one. In the mid-19th century, one of our ancestors was a Unitarian thinker and proto-feminist, Margaret Fuller. And it was one of my ancestors who I started to follow, David Henry Thoreau. I talked about him before, who in this tradition left us a window into the soul, into the writings of Margaret Fuller. He said in one of his journals, described Fuller as a person given to the boldest speculations. He says that what he admired about her is that she had the rarest good sense and discretion. He marveled at her large and generous views. I see this as pluralism. They didn't call it that back then, but this is what he's talking about with these large and generous views. And of her conversation, he said that few converse with the freedom and elegance as she. Thoreau had been impressed, but what Margaret Fuller wrote in 1845, which was the basis of this sermon, might have startled even him. She said, "I myself am more divine than any I see." Be with that. And imagine in 1845, a woman claiming her divinity, not through Christian obedience, not through submission, but through her own recognition that the sacred was already in her. No institution had to confer it. No man needed to ratify it. No law had to permit it. She was not claiming a necessarily superiority, but her own spiritual authority. And that claim was bold and beautiful and defiant for those times, and it echoes through every justice movement that followed. More than a century later, educator and writer Nikki Giovanni picked up that same thread and set it on fire in her poem, Ego Tripping, when she refused every story that tried to make Black women small. She placed herself at the center of creation and declared that I am the builder of the Sphinx. I am the mother of Nefertiti, whose tears cried the Nile. And then when she wrote that I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Y'all, that liberated my soul when I watched someone perform this when I was a little 12-year-old Black girl myself. To hear these words that somebody, a woman, could declare, I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal that I cannot be comprehended except by my own permission. Listen, that is not arrogance, that is testimony. Yes. That is a Black woman reclaiming the center of a story in the world that tried to erase her from it. And then going back to what Margaret Fuller said, that I myself am more divine than any I see, then Nikki Giovanni answered that across centuries, saying, I cannot be comprehended except by my own permission. These two women, 2 centuries, one truth. The sacred lives in our bodies. It always has. No president, no legislator, no culture of contempt can ever take that away. Do y'all believe that? Yes. Nothing can take that away. For centuries, religious traditions imagined the divine through masculine imagery. Things like father and king, ruler and judge. Those images shaped who has been allowed to lead, who has been allowed to speak. And it shaped who we've believed. But beneath those traditions, like an underground river, patriarchy could never quite dam. Another current kept flowing, and that was of the divine feminine. Femininity not as submission, femininity as a sacred power, a fierce compassion, embodied wisdom. The intuition that arises in your chest and somehow loudly whispers, something is not right here. It's creativity that imagines worlds that do not yet exist and then refuses to stop working until they do. It is courage strong enough to birth movements and patient enough to sustain them across generations. But let me say this clearly, that the divine feminine is not limited to women. It is not bound by gender binaries. Y'all know that, right? Okay, I'm just making sure that we know that it lives in everybody. It lives in everybody that is capable of nurturing life, of protecting dignity, of imagining justice, and that is something that all of us in this room believe in, right? And when we reclaim that, when we reclaim what the patriarchy fears most, this spirit of shared care, of interdependence, of relational wisdom, of collective flourishing. Y'all, this is what the patriarchy fears that we would live into, because when people can imagine something better, they just might demand it. Many of you know this or heard me say today that I identify as transmasculine and non-binary, which for me affirms and acknowledges that there is a she that lives in me. But I also want to just name that not every non-binary or trans person is as fluid about the exchange of he and she as me. I just happen to be one that really appreciates my she that helped shape my early life, the she that taught me a tenderness even before I had language to name it. Granted, most days I move through the world garbed as he. This she is a part of my sacred story, a part of the wisdom that I carry into this ministry. So when I speak about reclaiming the divine feminine, I am refusing the lie that our wholeness must be divided. I am claiming with Margaret Fuller and Nikki Giovanni that the sacred is far more expansive than any binary that we inherited. Tenderness and courage, compassion and conviction, fierce and tender, both, always, both. That is precisely what systems of domination are trying to erase with the bills targeting trans youth, the rhetoric reducing women to their reproductive capacity, the mockery of leaders whose power doesn't necessarily fit into the expected molds. Folks, they try to shrink our human imagination, and we are here today to say we refuse. Y'all say it. We refuse. We are beyond binaries. Yes. Women's History Month reminds us that every expansion of democracy, it has come at a cost, and somebody had to refuse the limits placed on them. Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free until everybody's free. Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, girl, you better bring you a folding chair. That work is not finished history. It's happening right now across the country, and right here in Georgia, women are stepping forward again and again. Scientists and mothers, lawyers and legislators, women are running, organizing, refusing to be pushed to the margins. Women widening the circle of democracy with every door they knock on, with every office that they seek. And then there is this group called the Hellcats. Have y'all heard about the Hellcats? Some of y'all have heard about it. It's Rebecca Bennett, Kate Conley, Joanna Mendoza, Maura Sullivan. These are all veterans, y'all. Mothers, women who found each other across state lines and formed this signal chat. They named themselves after the first women Marines of World War I. They are all running for office. Yes. They have said that steel sharpens steel, and nobody fights harder than a mom who was also a Marine. That's right. There are women building coalitions, women organizing voters, women refusing to be silent. And y'all, we don't gotta look far to see that spirit alive right here in this congregation. We know that there are so many here who I'm not gonna name you today, but the one who I will name is our senior minister, Reverend Terrence Strauss, who has helped lead this community with a fierce compassion that we've been naming today. And beyond the pulpit, some of y'all know that she helped co-found the Singing Resistance ATL. Did y'all know that she helped co-found that? So this movement, it takes its voice into the street, including that happening on the upcoming No Kings protest on March 28th. Because sometimes, yeah, that's some justice calling us right now on the phone. And they want to add their voice to this song because sometimes the arc of history bends not only through policy, but also through song. We know that here. We know that it bends through people showing up, through communities refusing to stay silent. Even individuals like all of you who show up week after week, holding one another, holding this congregation accountable to its highest values. The fierce and tender circle in this room is a form of resistance. Civil rights organizer Ella Baker spent decades building the infrastructure of the movement, and she once said that strong people actually don't need strong leaders. They need strong communities. Communities where wisdom is shared, where courage is contagious, where leadership is woven through the whole fabric of people. Movements sustained by a single leader will burn out, just like movements sustained by only anger will burn out. We know that movement sustained by collective love will endure. Y'all say that with me. Movement sustained by collective love will endure. Yes, and this has to be approached as a practice. Like democracy is a spiritual practice, and voting is a spiritual practice. Showing up for one another is a spiritual practice. It forms the basis of a covenant that no person is disposable. And all across the world, that covenant is being tested. But we remember that movement sustained by love will endure. Again, say it with me. Movement sustained by love will endure. That is the tradition we stand in. That is the community that we are building right here, right now. So today, as we honor she who is fierce and tender, We who are fierce and tender, knowing that she lives in women who march before us, that she lives in the candidates who are knocking on doors right now, that she lives in the voices protesting no kings in the street. She lives in every person in this room who has ever refused a smaller definition of yourself. The road could see Margaret Fuller's brilliance from outside, what only he could observe that she knew within. The sacred is here. The sacred is hers. The sacred is yours. Margaret Fuller said, I myself am more divine than any I see. Nikki Giovanni, I can't be comprehended except by my own permission. These words, they have never been arrogance. They are an invitation to even you right now. An invitation to all of us, regardless of gender, regardless of what the world has told you about your worth, to reclaim the sacred that's already within you, to reclaim the sacred that helps you to be fierce enough to challenge injustice, tender enough to hold one another, and brave enough to build the democracy that love requires.